Okay, so now we're going to take what we have already learned and put it in its historical context so we can see what was really going on during this period of time and in this region of the country. Okay, so let's do it. During the Civil War, Dave West was 12 years old and Emma West was 7 years old. So they lived through a lot of the things we've read about in school our whole life. I mean, when you look at the old movies like Glory or something, they were living during these times. And with the 1860 election of Republicans under Abraham Lincoln, a lot of the voters in South Carolina demanded that their state secede from the Union. And in December of 1860, that's exactly what they did. So the Civil War started in 1861, and it proved to be devastating to the whites, but it freed the blacks from slavery. Now, from 1865 to 1877, which is just 3 years before they filled out the census form we looked at, South Carolina underwent Reconstruction. This was a very good time for the slaves because the army took over the government for the state. They shut down the state Congress of Carolina, South Carolina, and the laws of the North became the laws of the South during this period. It lasted again from 1865 to 1877. Now, in 1877, the conservatives regained their political power of the state. They had a movement called the Redeemers. And in 1880, when they filled out those census forms we looked at, the Jim Crow laws were passed. And they were especially severe in this state because of the amount of African American laborers. All right, so a lot went down. And I'm gonna explain this to you. In 1890, they passed a law that all blacks weren't able to vote, and this law stayed on the books until 1965. I found that amazing. But anyway, let's continue. The Civil War ruined the economy, making it one of the two or three poorest states in the Union. Educational levels were low as public schools were underfunded, especially for African Americans. And most African Americans moved to small farms and grew cotton. And the more affluent African Americans became landowners who subdivided the land into farms and operated them. Um, with other sharecroppers, and they also use hired labor. So that's a big deal. So but this shows you why a lot of the West live by each other and why Dave West was marked down as a landowner. So it looks like he subdivided the land into farms and operated the farms by himself. Even after he passed and his wife was widowed, she was still able to rent rooms out. So this is a big deal. Now the question is, how were they lucky to get this land and other people, really got hit by the Jim Crow laws? And I think this is one of the important pieces. So check this out. The region of South Carolina that they lived in was called the Low Country. And the semi-tropical climate that made the Low Country such an excellent place for rice production also made it vulnerable for the spread of malaria and yellow fever. These tropical diseases were also found in Africa, and sometimes many believe that the slaves transported these disease overs and mosquitoes spread it to everybody. And the funny part about it is we were immune. Most of the slaves here are showed to have had sickle cell, or they were sickle cell carriers, which made them immune to malaria and yellow fever. So this swampy area used for growing rice became an environment that the overseers and the Europeans, colonizers, whatever you want to call them, slave owners, weren't able to stay in this land because of the mosquitoes. And so they pretty much just abandoned a lot of the land. And we were able to come in, take the land over, get the crops, and have our own communities. So that's an important piece about this. You get to see that. Now, the question remains, who were the African Americans that took over the low country? That's what they called it, the low country of South Carolina. And when you type this in into the South Carolina data banks, you find that the African Americans who lived in the low country were called the Gula. Now, that is spelled Gullah. The Gula, all right? The Gullah are African Americans who lived in the Low Country region of South Carolina and Georgia, which includes both the coastal plain and the sea islands. Historically, the Gullah region was once extended north to the Cape Fear on the coast of North Carolina, and also it went south all the way down to Jacksonville, Florida. But today, the Gullah are confined to the South Carolina and Georgian Low Country. So they're still there. We need to go check them out. You know what I mean? Apparently, this is our people. The Gullah people and their language are also called the Geechee, Geechee, which some scholars speculate is related to the Ogeechee River near Savannah, Georgia. Okay, that's my spiel. That's what I was able to find out using the census forms when in search of the maternal side of my family tree. And now let's go into some videos about the people of the Low Country in South Carolina. Peace.
If you will know more about the African American people in Charleston there, then you will know more about the Gullah. Come in there with me. Come on. Gullah is his own way of talking and doing. Since colonial times, we've been living near the coast out on the barrier island, separated from the main line by creeks, rivers, and tidal marshes. Way out there is a lot to see and hear. But the colored people? No, they didn't feel isolated. No, they feel blessed. Because being away like that, let us keep our own way of talking, our old customs and stories and music and way of living. Still keeping on in one way from another to this very day. Gullah is a language. Gullah was recognized as a language ever since 1939. Our Father, who art in heaven, all the way be thy holy and righteous name. Thy kingdom come, O Lord, let your holy and righteous word be done on this earth as it is done in your great heaven. Don't be shy. You can get a good taste of Gullah when you light it on the Heritage Trail.
It's the stuff that I was raised up on, my grandparents, great-grandparents, from generation to generation. It'd probably be a little different because hers probably was a little better. Yes.
This is real Gullah cuisine.
There's a lot to see and learn about Gullah. Bet you didn't know, for example, that the African-American shrimping fleet was a major influence on the growth of commercial fishing in this region. And guess what? There's a lot more to know about the African-American experience here in Charleston. You'll be fascinated and inspired when you visit the Avery African-American Heritage Museum and the Charles Pinckney National Historic Site. Like I said, there's a lot for folks to see here. Now you're going to know more about Gullah. I'm going to try to catch some catfish here for good the grits I got on the stove. You haven't come by and eat you now. Come by and grease your mouth. I gotta look for you now. I gotta look for you. There's gonna be plenty for everybody.